Canach is back! Woo! Hello everybody, I really shouldn't do such stupid intros. Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking at the new patch, Edge of the Mist, what came up, but this is purely a story video where I'm going to recap everything that happened in the plot for everyone and give a little bit of my own thoughts on what's happening. There is obviously a lot more going on in the patch, namely the actual Edge of the Mist itself map, but I've already done a mini-series on how that map works. It turns out a lot of people were worried before this came up that the story was going to come and interfere with a lot of the world versus world stuff and, you know, be really annoying. They didn't do that at all, really. There is tons of story, way more than I was expecting. I was really expecting this patch to be like a lot less on the story compared to last patch, which was all about her origins, and there was plenty of stuff. And I've been saying in recent videos, I really want the quantity to remain high. And I've got to be honest, I wasn't expecting it. I thought this would just be like a world versus world patch and we'd have to sit back and I could come on here and complain to you guys. But actually there's loads of story and none of it's got anything to do with the world versus world stuff. I'm going to sum it up for you all. But basically the ultimate conclusion of this patch, if you're going to click off, is that Lion's Arch seems like it's going to be the next big target, and the ultimate climax of this story, which will be told in the next two patches, will be some massive, immense war going on at Lion's Arch, which should be pretty interesting. So, let me take it from the top. When you first come in game, you're going to get a mail, as you usually do, and it will tell you some bad news has happened. My Trin has been freed from Lion's Arch. Now, who the hell is My Trin? Some of you guys might not remember. This was the first woman ever in the living story to actually give us the name of our ultimate villain here. We met My Trin during the Dragon Bash stuff. She was there for the assassination. She orchestrated it. It was all this plot to get My Trin at first on the council, to get that seat on the council, which eventually didn't happen because we caught her out during that patch. This was the same patch that we very first met Marjorie Delacroix, and together the two of us detected our way through, figuring out that it was My Trin was the ultimate perpetrator. And she fled to the Aetherblade hideout. And if you remember, after the Dragon Bash event, we then hunted My Trin down, and Keel brought her to justice. She's been jailed in Lion's Arch ever since that patch. You know, it's not quite a year ago now, but the Dragon Bash was quite a long time ago. This entire time, you guys could have gone to Lion's Arch, could have gone to the place that the game is now telling you to go, and you would have seen My Trin in that jail. And they were always sort of lofting it over our heads that, oh, she was eventually going to escape, and that they were going to do something with My Trin. But now finally that time has arrived. My Trin's first thought, though, as soon as she was broken out, was to flee, it seems. She didn't stay on Tyria at all. She actually fled through a portal to a new place in the mists. This is the Edge of the Mist. There have been random cracks in reality that have allowed people to go there. Whether she's doing this specifically because Scarlet asked her to or not, I believe is actually up in the air right now. They've set it up so it could be that My Trin wants nothing to do with Scarlet anymore and she's just fled and that's where she's gone off to hide. Or it could be that she's still very much in Scarlet's pocket. Scarlet needs her out there in that area of the mist for some reason that we don't actually know. Though this patch starts with this story about how My Trin has been freed, we don't actually see her in the patch at all. Just some Aetherblade forces out there in the Edge of the Mist. It's kind of ironic to me that the story is now that the Aetherblades have fled Tyria to hide in the mists, when they first appeared, most of the speculation, especially from me, was like where they came from, and people were like, have they come from the mist somehow? Because they were teleporting all over the place, and they seem to be this sudden force that came out of nowhere. And as the patches have gone along, it's become more and more clear that no, they didn't originally come from the mist. They were just a pairing of Inquest and Pirates, and the reason why they were able to teleport all over the place wasn't because of some uncanny ability to manipulate the mists. It was just because they were using like Scarlet's portal technology, which has been in use by many of her forces. So yeah, the devs seem to have taken this speculation, oh, they originally came from the mists, and now it's like, no, they didn't come from the mists, but now they've gone there. So I think that's quite cool, and I'm curious what they're doing with the Aetherblades now that they've hidden there. I think the story would be best if they were now like hiding from Scarlet. If you guys remember the way that Scarlet has got a lot of her alliances together. Usually it's because they've been offering a group of people something and they've like willingly turned themselves over to it. But the idea with the Aetherblades was always that they were sort of bullied into it. When we did the Twilight Arbor new path, and a lot of the time during patches, it seems like they're just being intimidated and bullied by Scarlet into working for her. And if that same plotline continues, then perhaps they would be the most likely of her armies to break away and try and do their own thing. And maybe that's what this is. Maybe this is My Trin saying, no, fuck Scarlet, we're hiding, we're coming out here into this place in the Edge of the Mists. I will touch very briefly on the idea of the Edge of the Mists themselves. Do I think that they are actually super relevant for story? Probably not. Just the blending of the three areas, the fact we've got like a Kodanish area, we've got a Charish area, and then a much more interesting ancient ruinsy area. I don't know whether there's any real significance to what those places are. I don't think that there's a real reason to look at the ruins in the Edge of the Mist and say, who created these ruins? What are they? You know, there are potentially some interesting stories. You know, maybe this is where, when the Massart fled from Tyria, that they eventually went to. Wouldn't that be cool if that was the story? But somehow, I don't think that is the case, or it's not really relevant. I think it's just a nice set piece, a nice artistically created place by the devs, and because it's like world versus world, and world versus world isn't usually associated with lore and stuff, maybe it's not worth speculating about. But I do like the idea that maybe now the Aether Blades are hiding where the Massart once hid, or something like that. So the story has taken us to this jail where we learn that Mytrin's escaped, and actually in that jail cell now is a different character. Mytrin's been out of the story for a little while. Who's been out of the story for even longer than that? Canach. Now you can see that Canach is in the cage, and we've known that Canach has been in jail in Lion's Arch for a long time, but he, unlike Mytrin, wasn't a character you could visit at any point. It was just taken as a given, oh, he's here somewhere. As far as I'm aware, he's here somewhere, but you can't find his cage. So now Mytrin is out of the cage, but Canach's in it. This is the first time we've got to interact with Canach in a really long time. So for those of you who have forgotten who Canach is, this is like the anti-hero Sylvari dude that was probably one of my favourite characters in the Living Story, though he's had very little to do with it for a long time. His story was very closely intertwined with the South Sun stuff, which really has been very separate and unrelated to the rest of the story to do with Scarlet. Basically, Canach felt that the Consortium was heavily responsible for the attack that happened on Lion's Arch last year after Halloween, and he went rogue. He was like this crazy anti-villain dude that was really menacing and really scary, and he went around hunting down the Consortium and eventually was jailed by Ellen Keel for it, despite the fact, really, his motivations were pretty reasonable. You know, nobody likes the Consortium, but it was against the law to be such a crazy bastard that was trying to kill everyone, so he got jailed. And now we can see him and we can talk to him, and I was really excited when I saw him. I was like, oh my god, Canach's coming back into the story. How are they going to link this together? Except he's so lame now. Like, they've ruined Canach. I am sorry. Maybe some people like how he's changed, but the coolest thing about this character was that he was like this edgy, badass dude that like wasn't scared to get his hands bloody to fight for what he believes in or whatever, and he wasn't always on the right side of the law. He was cool. He was an anti-villain, and now he's sat in this cage like saying, oh, I've made all my share of mistakes. I'm not going to break out. I'm just going to sit here and do my sentence like a good little boy. Yes, Mytrin got broke out, and maybe I could have left with them, but I don't want to. I want to atone for my past mistakes. I'll pay my debts. Oh my god. What a soppy, whiny bastard. It's really, really annoying to me what they've done to change Canach. Okay, he's a completely different character when you're speaking to him in that cage compared to, like, how you see him in some of the short stories they put on the website. Alright, I'm going to read you a passage from one of the short stories, okay, where he's hunting down the Consortium and trying to find out who's responsible for everything that happened, right? This comes straight from one of the short stories, and this is the same character, okay? The interior of Bling's hovel was silent and still. Did you hear me? I'm hurt, he started, but a hard-soled boot slammed into the middle of the Asura's back and sent him skidding across the rough wood floor. The door slammed shut, leaving Bling gasping in the darkness with a face full of abrasions and a throat full of fear. Sub-Director Bling. The voice was soft, cultured, and disturbingly calm. Bling recognized the speaker and choked back his rising panic. Canach! Bling squeaked. The intruder struck a match, revealing his cold, expressionless face. It was indeed Canach, and the Sylvari mercenary was every bit as grim as Bling remembered. Man, he was so badass in this story. He was badass in game as well. In that same story, he's like got this bag of cut-off heads that he throws on the floor, and like the blood starts pooling down to intimidate the Sylvari. He was amazing. And then you go in game and you look at Canach now and it's just like, why? You know what really worries me? They've denied, I believe, this theory, but a lot of people have been putting it forward. Now, maybe ArenaNet are trying to make like a Destiny's Edge 2.0 kind of thing. You know, like one of each race comes together and you would have, say, Marjorie Delacroix is the human, Bram would be the Norn, Rox would be the Char, Timey would be the Asura, and we're looking for a Sylvari, right? And And now you look at what they're doing with Canach, right? And this idea, as I'm going to express soon, about how Lion's Arch is going to get attacked for the end of all this, and Canach is currently in Lion's Arch. It seems like maybe they're trying to make Canach into a good guy so he can be a part of Destiny's Edge 2.0. And it's like, why do you have to make him into such a soppy good guy so that he could be a part of something like that? Keep him the badass, edgy dude that, yes, is fighting for us and is allied with us temporarily, but that doesn't mean he has to be 100% goody two-shoes. It really, really annoys me. Anyway, so I sort of had a big flip there. I was like, yay, Canach, and then I was like, oh my god, Canach. So that's how the story starts. Canach does have one interesting thing to talk about, I will say. He mentions that he actually knew, because there's both Sylvari, obviously. I guess in the early days, most Sylvari would have known one another. He talks about how he did once know Scarlet, back when she was called Kiara. That's Scarlet's original name. I've always pronounced it as Ciara, because that's how I read it. But apparently it's Kiara, and now this is the first patch, I believe, that's actually put it forward in-game voice acted. So Kiara. Canach knew Kiara, and there's a little bit of dialogue about perhaps how they'd be similar, but circumstances have been different for the two. You know, Canach was a bit of a bad guy, if it meant that he was fighting for what he believed in, and I guess that's true of Scarlet too, but you know, they draw some comparisons between the two, and basically in the end say, no, Canach's a better person than Scarlet. But it was nice to see anyway that they have a little bit of history there, and it could mean that there could be a moment in the future of the story where Canach interacts with Scarlet, and it's like, oh god, okay, what's going to happen? Are they going to reminisce, or is he going to bring her back and make her remember who she once was? You know, something like that. It was interesting, at least. The most interesting thing about the way that the story starts, though, has nothing to do with Canach. It's the guard that stood next to him. This prison guard was the one that was on duty when everybody broke out. They're worried that they're going to get in trouble, but they mentioned to us that something has changed in the water at Lion's Arch. This actually happened last patch. ArenaNet added one of those thumper turrets, which are looking for ley lines of magic deep beneath the surface of Tyria. They added one into the waters of Lion's Arch. This guard tells you about it. It gives you a cutscene where your camera moves from where you currently stood deep under the water, and then you see it, and at the very moment the thumper turns from red, which is the default color they are, to green, which is very ominous. And this news you feel is important enough to go and tell Marjorie and Lady Casimir back in Divinity's Reach at the Dead End Bar. So off you pop over to the Dead End Bar. You get this cool moment. I liked this moment for some reason in The Living Story, because it was like, oh hey, I'm actually in Divinity's Reach again, and I get to walk around and see the sights even for a short period of time. Head into the Dead End Bar to inform your friends about what's going on. When you first get there, Lady Casimir and Marjorie are having a conversation about just bland shit. They're talking about curtains, I think, and Lady Casimir's like, oh, I want to pump this place up and make it all look amazing. And Marjorie's like, no curtains unless they're black. And then she's like, okay, that'll be amazing. So they're talking about this, and you go in and interrupt them. They tell you two things, basically. Number one, that they actually have a contact at the Dermond Priory who will be meeting them very soon, and they'll let you know when that happens. And you inform them about the probe in Lion's Arch, and they say it's very concerning, but they'll have to deal with it once this Priory thing's happened. At the same time, for some random reason, not entirely sure why, seems a little bit shoehorned in, but it's okay, Rox appears in the Dead End Bar, and she's all pally with Marjorie and Lady Casimir, and she mentions that Bram and Timey, who at the end of the last patch, if you remember, Bram had unwillingly taken custody of Timey to bring her home to Ratasum. Those two got caught up in the trouble at Lion's Arch when Mytrin escaped, and they chased Mytrin, well, Timey chased Mytrin through the portal into the Edge of the Mists, and Bram had no choice but to follow her, so they're stuck in the Edge of the Mists. Rox isn't there with them, but she lets you know and says maybe they'll need a little bit of your help, and that's where you head to next. If you do stick about a little bit longer in the Dead End Bar, everyone starts having conversations with one another, and at last, this is the beautiful romantic moment where ArenaNet finally announced to us that Marjorie and Lady Casimir are indeed a mated pair, as Rox asks. So yeah, they like go into this territory. I had like the biggest grin on my face. I was like, wow, they're really going for this? And yeah, so Rox is like, oh, you two seem super close. Are you a mated pair? And they're like, oh yeah, we're totally a thing. What about you? Have you got anyone back home? And then Rox does something quite cool. She mentions that one of those old warband members she had, that again, you got to read about in one of the stories on the main website, actually she used to be in like a serious relationship with, and then obviously all of her mining buddies died. It was the char called Nonus Pickflea, as everyone called him, but I think his real name was Nonus Pickaxe. So yeah, apparently they were a thing, but then obviously Rox has got a pretty tragic past. Everybody died, and I think again they're just trying to make you remember, okay, this is why Rox cares so much about getting into Ritlock's warband. You know, she has no warband, she lost her whole family, and this is really important to her. So That's a little bit of conversation that happens. You, though, are intent on going to the Edge of the Mist, the cool new World vs. World map, and then we get to play loads of World vs. World. They actually don't make you play any World vs. World at all if you don't want to. You will see in the footage of this video, I don't fight a single person. I see a lot of players around, but I don't fight anyone. I just do what I have to do, and I get back out. So, oh, I will mention as well, just for sitting there in the dead-end bar, this was kind of weird, and I'm sure a lot of people will be so happy about it. Like, you literally just sit there and listen to all of the characters, and then the game's like, here, have a reward, and it's like, oh yeah, you get a bunch of experience and silver, which was so odd to me. I was like, I didn't do anything, I just listened to people. But it's good because it means people are actually being incentivized to go to these places and listen to the conversations. Anyway, I had to take a break at this point because Edge of the Mist, as many of you guys know, this is why this video is a little bit later than usual. Edge of the Mist was down when it first came out. I'm not too fussed about it. I played the betas, so I wasn't super excited about getting in there. But it was down for a long time. I took that opportunity to try and get one of the achievements. There are only 3 achievements in this living story, by the way. There's one for getting into the Edge of the Mist through portals that are spawning all around the world. There's one for doing all of the story stuff, and then there's one for sort of doing half of the story stuff. I didn't have any of those achievements at the point that I'm describing to you right now, and because Edge of the Mist was down, I couldn't do anything, but there will be a little bit of footage of me going to those portals while I was waiting. But finally, once I got into Edge of the Mist, you find pretty much straight away that Bram and Tyria are right next to you. As you guys know, with the Edge of the Mist, there are 3 servers, or 3 colours that are fighting one another, right? And that means everyone has their own individual spawn points, and everyone that goes in there always has Bram and Tyria to talk to right next to them. So I find it really interesting that that single map in the game actually has 3 copies of Bram in it and 3 copies of Tyria in it, in theory. It's like a really bizarre thought, but you practically as a player, all it means is you load in and you see that they're stood right next to you having a conversation. There's so much story with these 2 as well. Like, they seem to have voiced so much idle dialogue, you know, just random chit-chat between the 2 characters. I spent ages in the actual dialogue boxes speaking to these characters, and they were constantly blathering on to one another all the time. And I say the word blathering there, I was actually really happy that there was so much extra story and that they were talking to each other so much. This is the kind of quantity that I was looking for. But I'll sum up what you find out from Bram and Tyria. Tyria was going to go home to Ratasum, as we saw last patch, but when everything kicked off in Lion's Arch, as I said, she decided, oh no, I'll chase my twin into the Edge of the Mists. Bram had to follow her. When they got there, if you guys remember, Tyria last patch had like a very specific model where she was a tiny little Asura stood on a big golem. Well, in this patch, she's just stood alone on the floor. Like, it's a completely different model. You can see that she's very small, and the golem has actually been destroyed. When they got to the Edge of the Mists, something happened, and now Tyria needs to get some repairs done. The catch is you have to get her a bunch of stuff for those repairs, which are like directly in the middle of the map. So this is the only incentive the game gives you to actually go and play. It tells you, all right, you've just started out, you have to walk to the middle of the map, pick this stuff up, and then you can waypoint back. That's all they ask of you. And as you should see it in the footage in the background, I did it without getting ganked or anything, but I did add a bunch of skills to my bar, like mist form and stuff, so that I could be sure I would at least get there if someone jumped me. Because it seems like a great place to camp, and you just watch as newbies come in, PvE newbies that have got nothing, and then you just jump them every time they try and get to the repair box. I think I would probably do that if I was a little bit more into World vs. World at the moment. Anyway, besides that little fetch quest that the game makes you do, which is basically a traditional quest, by the way, all they need is a little sound effect going like ding when you get to the repair stuff and you've completed your objective, and it would be perfect. It would be exactly the kind of quest that Guild Wars 2's needed for a long time. But besides from this, you can continue talking to both characters. Bram doesn't have that much extra stuff, not too much interesting to say, but you can have this huge conversation with Tyria and ask her an awful lot of stuff. This is the point where in-game finally she has mentioned she is an orphan. You guys will remember last patch I talked about this theory that her father is Omad, and that's the reason she's so interested in Scarlet, because Omad worked so closely with Scarlet before dying. But that whole theory rested on the idea that she was an orphan, and now it's officially there in-game. She says, oh yeah, I have no parents, you know, people do look after me, Zodge has been looking after me. Vorp is an Asura that was present last year during the Queen's Jubilee stuff, and we haven't heard much about, but seems to have a bit of history with Tyria. And yeah, basically she says she has no parents. So that theory could still hold true. However, at the same time, you can ask Tyria right now in this patch, hey, why do you care so much about Scarlet? And she doesn't mention anything to do with her father or anything to do with being an orphan. Instead, she just says that she's really drawn to Scarlet because of freedom. If you put her villainous stuff aside, Scarlet has travelled the world, accruing vast amounts of knowledge, and it's sort of the Asuran dream in a small way that she's got this freedom to do so much stuff. Now, why does Tyria care about freedom? Well, there's another thing you can ask her about, and that's why she has to use her golem to walk around a lot of the time. You find out Tyria is actually diseased. She's got something wrong with her. that's caused her to lose full use of her legs. She can use them for a very short period of times. She specifically mentions like going from the bed to the bathroom, but she can't really walk for very long. She's got a disease that will eventually like consume her whole body and just like destroy her. So she's this little baby Asuran girl that like has got this terrible thing that's destined to happen to her. And I think if you really think about all those stories together, that could explain why Tammy does care so much about Scarlet's freedom and what she's doing and wants to sort of follow in her footsteps, so to speak. It's really interesting. You can also ask her whether her disease is curable, and Tammy says she doesn't really know, but she doesn't want any pity in a very typical Asuran way. And I quite like that, you know, the Asuran can have these devastating diseases on them, but because they're so technologically advanced, it doesn't really matter. She's just got a golem that does all of the walking for her, and that's fine. And again, it's a bit more character development. I like Tammy a little bit more as well now, because I know that bit more about her. Anyway, so that's that for that section of the living story. We're coming into the final bit now. After you've done all of that, you get another mail from Marjorie and Lady Casimir, and they mention, hey, do you remember we told you that we had a contact at the Dermot Priory? He's just arrived. So you go back to the Dead End Bar and see what you find out. Alright, so here's the setup, okay? Marjorie used to be a member, and this is a new reveal, used to be a member of the Dermot Priory. She's sort of off time now, she doesn't really work with them, but she's still on their roster, so to speak. And she did a lot of favours for the Dermot Priory, and so they feel like repaying her every now and then. Marjorie recently got in contact with the Priory to ask them to send as many artifacts as they could related to the Scarlet story so she could examine them and find out exactly what Scarlet's doing, and most importantly, what she's going to do next. So you reach the Dead End Bar, you can see this Priory member there, a Char of all races, which I thought was pretty cool, and he says, oh yeah, we've got this stuff, I just need to make sure she doesn't ruin any of it, and then I'm going to take it back. You walk in, and now in the Dead End Bar, across all the no patrons are in there, it's literally just Marjorie and Lady Delacroix, and across all the tables, across the bar, everywhere are all these artifacts that you can interact with. And you're going to spend a long time in this instance. I think I spent at least 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes, just examining all of this stuff. Like, it's really ambient in there. It's a lot like when you were in Scarlet's cave. I cranked my sound effects up, you know, the music's really good, it's ominous, and then when you get the big reveal at the end where you find out Lion's Arch is going to get attacked, it gets all really grim in there. It's very, very well done. I say there are no patrons in there. There is one other character, and that's Vorp. This character that Tyria was talking about is actually here in the Dead End Bar. For those who don't remember who Vorp was, during the Queen's Jubilee, Vorp was basically the first ever character after Scarlet revealed herself to teach us who Scarlet was. He was the one that said, oh, I heard that she's been all around the world learning all this stuff. And Vorp sort of downplayed her a little bit, though. Tyria now mentions in retrospect that Vorp was probably just jealous, as many Asura are, but nonetheless, he's here trying to help you detect what's going on. So every time you go to one of these artifacts, Marjorie, Lady Casimir, and Vorp all have a little bit of input for you. Vorp isn't like physically present, he's doing what I think they call it a holo conference, which apparently isn't something Asura can do very much because it costs a lot of energy, and he's not physically there, he's just like one of those holograms, so he's got like a bit of a distorted voice, but it gets very, very ambient. I have to say, this was one of the closest things to a real RPG experience I've had in Gw2 for a long time, like a really story-heavy one. Because Vorp's voice is really sci-fi, I had a moment halfway through this where Vorp suddenly chimed in, and with his like sound effect on his voice, for like the briefest of moments, my mind like made me nostalgic of Mass Effect. I was like, oh, this reminds me of like being in a conversation with a character there. That's such a good sign. But let me give you an example of some of the items in the room. For example, like there's a mini version of the thumper turrets, the probes that Scarlet's been using. You can interact with it, and it will sum up what's happened with that probe. And for every single artifact you get, the game allows you to make your own decision about what you think happened with this story, because it's all theories and speculation out there in the community, and the devs have finally let the players do it themselves in game. So every single artifact you interact with, you will get 3 options that you can say to the other characters. You can say, okay, I think this is what's going on, and then they'll give you some feedback based on what you said. So you can say, oh, I think the thumper turrets are a distraction, or you can say, oh, I think the thumper turrets are looking for the ley lines beneath the surface of Tyria, or I think the thumper turrets have got nothing to do with Scarlet at all, they're just there for laws, you know, stuff like that. Always 3 options. It's never clear whether you've picked the right one. Sometimes the characters will agree with you more, sometimes they'll agree with you left, sometimes they'll just talk about random stuff, like the humans will sometimes mention the ministers, Vorp mentions the Arcane Council every now and then, and I like those moments too, because again, it's one of those things that make you appreciate the wider universe and the wider lore. Anyway, I'm not going to go over all of the stuff. As I said, it was a really long instance, this video is already quite long, but here's the main ones that that really stuck out for me. they mentioned the Kaith and Scarlet mystery, alright? And this is something that keeps floating out of my brain, and I love it every time I remember it. One of the biggest mysteries, obviously, is this idea of E, but if you guys remember, when we did the Twilight Arbor instance, Kaith was hunting down Scarlet. Scarlet had all those pre-recorded messages for her, and Scarlet started teasing Kaith, and one of the lines of dialogue was like, Kaith, I know that bad thing you did. Don't think that everyone's forgotten. I know what you did. And she's like messing with her mind. There's, I think, another mention that was set up a really long time ago in the second novel that mentions that Kaith has like a really dark history, a really dark past. If you guys play through the personal story for the Sylvari as well, early on in it, they really set up that Kaith is like this ruthless character. Kaith is like how I want Canach to be, basically. You know, she just randomly kills some Nightmare Court at one point instead of pleading with them. So there's like this mystery to do with Kaith that Scarlet, they established, knows about. And ArenaNet brought it up again here. They mentioned, oh yeah, what is it that perhaps they know? And one of the artifacts in here leads to a conversation about that, and you can have your own theory about it. Another really big one that was very important to me was there's actually some metal casing, not of a twisted watchwork creation, which is what Scarlet's been making, but of a steam creature. Steam creatures were the mobs that have been in the game since launch. You know, there's that area in Lornar's Pass, if you guys remember, not too far away from where the Marionette is now, where there were all these steam creatures wandering around in various other places in the game that have been like this big mystery that ArenaNet have never really announced where they came from. There's all that stuff in the Asuran personal story where it sort of determined that the steam creatures were from another alternate reality if you did the Infinity Ball stuff, and all the way through the living story, those steam creatures have been popping up every now and then, but ArenaNet have always been very tight-lipped about why, and it's been so long now that I just thought, oh, they were just random mobs that had been thrown in. Maybe there is no real answer as to why the steam creatures were a part of this story, but for the first time in this patch, you can actually interact with one of the steam creatures, and all the characters say, oh yeah, look, the steam creatures are really similar to the Watchwork Knights. What's the connection here? How is this all related? And you can put forward your theory, and you can be like, oh, there's no relation. You can say, oh, the Queen is corrupt, and the Queen paid Scarlet to make all of those things so that they would rebel. Or you can say, oh, the Queen based her designs of the Watch Knights on the steam creatures, and Scarlet just used that to her advantage. It's awesome. I never said the thing about the Queen betraying her people, because I genuinely don't believe that the Queen is evil, but that would be interesting to click and see how Marjorie and Casimir would have responded about how, you know, their Queen could be this evil person. I'm sure they wouldn't have liked it, but that was awesome. They mentioned that, you know, again, like they're putting forward this mystery that was slipping out of my mind once again. And that's pretty much it, guys. I think I've been talking for way too long. It's really interesting, that final thing. A lot of it is quite obvious, but overall the goal of this instance is to lay out every event that's happened and what connects it all together. So, for example, it's pretty clear to me now, especially after this instance, the reason why Scarlet got the Dredge and the Flame Legion together was so that together they would create this new technology, this sonic magical technology, which later she would apply to create the Thumper turrets, and these use these sonic abilities and these magical abilities to detect where the ley lines were. And that was like the ultimate goal of her original alliance that she set up. And you do this for everything. It covers everything from the Thorman overreactor to her journal that we saw last patch, which now has timestamps, by the way, which I mentioned last video. I was like, I wish this would have timestamps, and now it does, which is awesome. You know, all the way up to the most recent Marionette fight. The eventual theory that all the characters come up with, and it props up time and time again, is that Scarlet has formed like this massive, incredible army. She's got all of this technology, and she is going to attack Lion's Arch, where this final probe is. It seems like the next couple of patches, something huge is going to go down at Lion's Arch. Don't forget, this is the final conclusion of the entire living story. I was a little bit jaded when they kept saying this, and was like, oh, it's happening at Lion's Arch, Lion's Arch, Lion's Arch. There's going to be some huge fight. I was a little bit jaded, because I was like, man, we've heard that so many times before. It reminded me a bit of the Queen's Jubilee stuff. But do ground yourself in the fact that the living story is much better right now, and this is the end of like the entire season, so do expect something pretty significant to happen. After you leave the instance, everyone's like, oh, we'll go tell everyone, we'll make sure everybody knows, but the Arcane Council basically aren't interested in what Vorp has to say, and the guys at Lion's Arch are like, oh, well, we defended ourselves during Dragon Bash, so obviously we can defend ourselves again, even though Evan Nashblade, it seems, is like pretty concerned about the idea also, but Lion's Arch seem like they're not defending themselves. It looks like just our main heroes are going to be there for some big fight that's staged. Canach is still in jail there. I wouldn't be surprised to see him escape in the next couple of patches and something big to happen. If it does turn out that Mytrin also has like deviated away from Scarlet, and I could be completely wrong about this, there may be like one line of dialogue I'm forgetting that just says, oh no, she's still working with Scarlet, and then there's just no doubt. But if perhaps she is also separated, maybe the way we eventually win this fight is because Mytrin comes out of nowhere like the Cavalier and then saves the day or something. That would be pretty cool. But anyway, there you go, guys. That is the current patch. It's so much story. Like, I haven't even talked about the Edge of the Mists. Very interesting. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully everything's clear to you guys about what's going on in the story, what to be excited about for next patch. I'd love to hear your theories, but for now we're just waiting, and I guess I will see you guys next time.